Welcome to another edition of Iran International Insight. I'm Farzin Nadimi, a senior fellow with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. More than 6 months after the 12-day war, Iran has been keeping its nuclear program on a standby, actively rebuilding its missile arsenal and maintaining as many of its regional proxy networks as possible. But the events of the past few weeks have put a long-neglected reality back at the center of focus: the regime's willingness to use brutal force against its own people. Remember those the regime in Iran killed in cold blood, and we hold their families in our hearts. We meet a moment when the Iranian regime's brutality at home, the Iranian people's future, the US president's promises, and the risk of a direct US-Iran clash are no longer separate topics, but one converging crisis. The choices made in the coming weeks can potentially shape not just Iran's future, but the stability of the region and the credibility of US policy. Our guest today has a very unique background and vantage point to the moment. Retired United States Army four-star General, General David Petraeus. General Petraeus, welcome.
Great to be with you.
You bring a unique perspective to our discussion. You confronted Iranian elements directly as commander in Iraq against IRGC Quds Force-backed networks, assessed Iran's as CENTCOM commander as the central long-term regional challenge, and dealt with its covert activities and strategic signaling at the intelligence level when you directed the CIA. It is a real privilege to moderate this conversation, and I'm very much looking forward to a serious, candid discussion with you about the latest developments in Iran and related to Iran. With that context, I would like to start by asking you a few pressing questions. Then we will move into a hopefully lively Q&A session. My first question is, when a regime responds to nationwide protests with mass killings and systematic brutality, does that signal confidence or fear? And what does it tell you about cohesion at the top of the regime in Tehran?
Well, I think it signals enormous questions about the regime's ability to sustain a situation. It probably signals an awareness that they have failed in economical management, finances, in a number of other ways. And it signals enormous sense that the regime is truly threatened. And I would submit that it is more threatened right now than probably at any time since perhaps the Iran-Iraq War. It certainly is more under pressure than any of the previous. You can enumerate all the different demonstrations in just the past decade or more alone, and this is far and away the most significant. Although I should note up front that it is starting to look like the regime will be able to put this down, but I would also submit that the actions of the regime are not sustainable. You cannot keep this many security forces, Basij militia, police of all various types, Revolutionary Guards Corps, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, other security elements. You cannot be this active with them in every single village and town and municipality the way they have been, and again, continue to do that over time. The question, as always, has been how much time, what would follow, and so forth, and we can perhaps get into that. I think, though, I'd really like to start by putting this into context, because the last year has been very, very damaging to Iran and its efforts throughout the region, arguably throughout the world. Its proxies, as you know, are dramatically degraded, really all of them. Hamas certainly not defeated. We might talk about Gaza, still very significant obstacles to phase 2, disarmament of Hamas in the agreement that was reached. but nonetheless dramatically reduced in their capabilities. Hezbollah equally so, and an extraordinary operation by Israel that really started, the serious operation started with the most extraordinary intelligence supply chain operation in history, where thousands of pagers that had been altered by Iran or by Israel after buying them from Taiwan with a company they made up and then sold to Hezbollah so fantastically, and thousands of them blew up simultaneously, very seriously injuring all of those and killing a few dozen. But the injuries were what mattered. And the next day, the other element in the supply chain, the walkie-talkies, blew up. And this enabled Israel to eliminate the possibility of Hezbollah doing what everyone feared most, which is to launch an overwhelming, 10 or tens of thousands of missiles, rockets, drones simultaneously against the Israeli very complex and layered air and ballistic missile defense system, but that could have been overwhelmed by a strike of that magnitude, keeping in mind that they had 150,000 missiles, drones, rockets at the outset of this particular war. And they have been degraded very substantially. Yes, they're not yet disarmed. They are south of the Litani River. A lot of work needs to be done by the Lebanese armed forces. I think, as an aside, that we need to provide more assistance to them to enable them to carry forward the effort to disarm. And I hope that we recognize that in the United States. In addition to helping the new government, keep in mind that one of the other achievements of the degradation of Hezbollah was that it changed the political dynamics on the ground and actually allowed them finally to agree on a President Aoun and other key members of the government, which they had not been able to do for over a year. So that's Hezbollah. Syria, of course, no longer an ally to Iran. Ahmed al-Shara managed to develop a force in Idlib that was so capable and the regime forces so fragile and inadequate, without support from Hezbollah, without support from the Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force, and without Russian air support and special operations forces this time. That's what kept him on the throne last time. His forces fell very rapidly in Aleppo. Then Hama Holm's road to Damascus was open. He took it, and Bashar al-Assad and his wife fled to Moscow. So that is no longer a country that's going to allow Iranian bases, factories, headquarters, and transit on the ground of weapon systems, munitions, and materiel to reconstitute Hezbollah, which they're trying to do. In fact, they're sending money, reportedly, probably through Turkey and other countries, to Hezbollah. But again, Hezbollah is going to be degraded for a very long time. And if we help the Lebanese armed forces and government sufficiently, I think they can continue the process of disarmament, which is indeed a requested demand, actually, that we have made. And then the Iraqi Shia militia, they're in a very difficult position. Elections have just been held. There's all the maneuvering. By the way, I was just in Baghdad 2 to 3 months ago. I was stunned by how transformed the city is in terms of its infrastructure, starting with the road from the airport to what used to be the Green Zone, which used to be known as the most dangerous road in the world, Route Irish. When you drove down it, you'd be doing 100 miles an hour as fast as you could, and there would be car hulks littered all over that had been blown up. It is now a manicured lawn in the center, uplit palm trees at night, and architectural walls on the side, and it is perfectly paved. That was just a metaphor for what has happened in Baghdad, where for all of the challenges of Iranian influence in politics and with the militia, corruption, terrible bureaucracy, political nepotism, you name it, all the challenges the land of the two rivers has, they have really made significant progress. And I wish that everyone who served in Iraq after 9/11 could actually see what has transpired. But the bottom line is the Shia militia there, I don't think, are going to rise up in a very significant way against Americans, much less Israelis or some other demonstration of kinship with Iran, even if the U.S. actually has strikes against Iran, which for the short term, I think, are less likely right now, and we can get into that in a moment as well. Beyond that, of course, the nuclear program has been devastated. Yes, there's a possibility that there could be some stockpile of highly enriched uranium, not weapons grade yet, and there could be some advanced centrifuges hidden somewhere as well. But the bottom line is that if that is the case, Israel or the U.S. or both will find it and destroy it. And even if they can do some kind of additional enrichment, the metallization capability that used to exist no longer does. It was both bombed by the Israelis and then a massive ordnance penetrator. So they don't have a way of taking the gaseous state, turning it into a metal, which of course is necessary for a weapon. So that's another challenge there. I assess that it's set back by at least 2 years. That's a very substantial accomplishment by Israel and the U.S. And then, of course, the missile program has been dramatically degraded, both by the strikes by Israel against the missile stocks and the launchers, and by just the sheer expenditure of missiles during the 12-day war. You noted that they're trying to reconstitute that capability. I would hope, frankly, that if the U.S. Does carry out strikes, that among the targets would be the missile program and, frankly, other retaliatory means that Iran still has, because those could be put to use against American bases or interests or of course, our partner Israel. And then finally, I'd just note that Iran is essentially defenseless at this point. The supposedly sophisticated Russian air and ballistic missile defense systems were destroyed by Israel even before the United States entered that particular 12-day war. It was done with F-35s flown by Israelis, which is a great credit to the F-35. You're never 100% certain how a given airframe is going to perform against a given air and ballistic missile defense system, especially one like the S-300, which is supposedly sophisticated. The answer is it performed magnificently, took them all out. And again, as long as you stay above the range of heavy machine guns, air defense cannons, whatever, 10,000 feet, a little bit more, you're not going to be vulnerable. So Iran is in a very, very difficult situation, and that's before, of course, the latest round of economic disasters beset Iran, with the currency falling to a terrible level and inflation rising to a terrifying level, and the purchasing power of the people declined very substantially. And this time, there's not much Iran can do about it. They have very little capacity. The commitment to give $7 a month additional to the people has been derided by the people, laughed at. And, you know, there's nothing as significant as they did. I think it was the previous time of demonstrations where they said, you can not wear the hijab and we'll take the religious police off the street, and that calmed the crowds for a period of time. The situation here, of course, is that thousands of Iranians have been killed, innocent Iranians expressing their displeasure with the government. Way over 10,000, way over that, have been imprisoned. And there is a presence that is so substantial that it is starting to result in a diminution of the demonstrators' activities. President Trump also highlighted that indirectly he had been told there would not be executions, particularly one individual, and that the killing, quote, would stop or was stopping. He used both terms. We'll see how that turns out. There are still very substantial demonstrations, but our assessment is, again, that for the time being, the regime probably has prevailed, which candidly, sadly, was the base case, given the extraordinary capability and sheer manpower when it comes to the besieged, to the IRGC elements, to the police of various types as well.
So you agree that they maintain a certain amount of cohesion?
I guess it is cohesion. I'm not sure whether that's the perfect term for it. They are hanging together because they know, you know, what was it that, was it Tom Paine who famously said we must hang together or we will all hang separately? I think that's really how you might describe the situation. Keep in mind that the regime, if it goes down, they lose everything. They are in a very privileged position in society. As you know, the IRGC alone probably controls well over 40% of the economy. Corruption is very, very substantial. By the way, another indicator of how serious the regime insiders see this is they reportedly have been sending their own cash outside the country to get it, again, away from an economy where the real has been plummeting, inflation is so high, and the currency is becoming increasingly worthless. So they are hanging together so far. There are a number of indicators. In fact, the Institute for the Study of War, I'm a member of the board, and we have the Petraeus Institute there, published a set of indicators that you should look for to see that there are essentially cracks appearing in the regime. There are some of these appearing, but not in the kind of number that would be necessary, and certainly not in the kind of significant action that, say, the Egyptian military, the Egyptian army took in Tahrir Square. When in order to quell the demonstrations, they stepped back and said, we're not going to kill our fellow citizens. Mubarak's going under the bus anyway. And oh, by the way, his son was supposed to succeed him. We didn't like that idea very much. We don't see this as a monarchy. We'll wait and see. Whoever's elected, we'll deal with that individual. If we don't like him, we'll get rid of him. And they did. Mohammed Morsi's gone. And, of course, one of their own, al-Sisi, has been elevated to, I think, field marshal as well as president.
Probably they didn't have an IRGC in Egypt.
Yes. So, yeah. And, of course, I guess you all really know, but for others watching, the IRGC was created. It's a mirror Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines because the Artesh, the regular Army, Navy, Air Force, couldn't be trusted to preserve the regime. They'll fight in certain circumstances, for sure. But in this case, we're seeing why the IRGC was created. It is the loyal force, come what may. And so far, again, you don't see large examples of what you'd look for to identify that, the regime is beginning to crack.
It seems that you do not see the beginning of the end of the regime.
I think this probably is the beginning of the end. The problem is that the end is not near, I don't think, I fear. I'd like to see, look, again, as you noted, hundreds of Americans, I think over 600 Americans alone in uniform were killed by the explosively formed penetrators that were provided by the Revolutionary Guard Quds Force to Shia militia loyal to Iran, that in many cases had been trained, equipped, and were directed to a degree by the Quds Force. And you may recall we captured a member of the Quds Force, Hamid the Mute, we called him, until 1 May when all of a sudden he said he would start talking on 1 May. He did, and we learned a great deal. He was the deputy commander of what that time was called Unit 2800, I believe, which was the element within the Quds Force that carries out training of Arab proxies, essentially. And again, very revealing at that time, and very revealing to see who was with him, Qais Khazali and his brother Laith, who are now political leaders of parties that are favorable towards Iran, even though they say, we're all Iraqi nationalists, but also have sizable militias associated with those parties. A big, big concern, of course, a huge lingering concern in Iraq, and one that Iraq over time is just going to have to deal with.
But it seems that they have lost the legitimacy of the regime.
Oh, gosh, I think the legitimacy was lost well before this particular juncture.
The slightest fragments
this is overwhelming evidence that the regime has lost legitimacy. The problem is it hasn't lost the capability to kill. Karim Sajapur, who many in here will know and who I respect very greatly at the Carnegie Institute as an Iran expert, has described this. This regime is dying. It's fighting, it's killing again, but it is also dying. The question is, when will the coffin be shut? And, of course, what would follow? And there are various scenarios, of course, about what could follow. In fact, he sketched out a number of them and described them in terms of situations around the world for which they provide a metaphorical image.
But do regimes under acute internal legitimacy crises become more cautious externally to avoid compounding risks, or they become more aggressive to restore deterrence and
obviously, there's two schools of thought on that. There is one, and actually two very plausible realities. One is that you create a problem elsewhere to take your eye off of what is going on at home. You create a nationalist fervor. I think they're past that. I think there was a tiny bit of that, perhaps, in reaction to the 12-day war. I think we could take action against the regime, and it would be applauded by the people, not a rallying cry for them. And that's where I tend to think the situation is now.
And there has been a lot of talks about how to react and to act upon the president.
Well, there's a number of options, and I'm sure I trust that the National Security Council staff and others have surfaced all these options. I mean, obviously, there's diplomatic initiatives. In fact, I think this UN Security Council is finally meeting. I mean, that's an obvious one, even though anything substantial will be vetoed by China and or Russia. But still, the process, just having that meeting, surfacing the issues. You could have a G7 meeting, G7 plus the Gulf Council, GCC. Again, there's a number of those. There are humanitarian actions you could take, positioning humanitarian assistance outside the country and then figuring out to get it inside. There are informational initiatives you could take, in particular, providing technology, Starlink and other technology, that can enable the people to communicate more effectively with each other, the demonstrators in particular, of course, and to communicate more effectively with the outside world. There are, of course, also economic initiatives that can be pursued. And President Trump has announced 25% sanctions on countries that trade with Iran, perhaps with an exception here or there. There could be more of that. There could be individual designation of regime leaders. That has actually begun. We've seen some of those designations in recent days. And, of course, there's a number of military options. And certainly you could go after the headquarters of the different security services that are putting down the demonstrations so violently, barbarically in many cases, as you learn about how they are actually targeting people personally. What happened during the 12-day war, when over a dozen nuclear scientists alone, the leading scientists, were killed, and a number of the security force leaders also very precisely brought to justice as well. And again, if there's going to be this kind of attack, and I think that it would be possible once the aircraft carrier task force, the Abraham Lincoln, is in vicinity with all of the other ships that come with an aircraft carrier task force, you would then have the ability not only to launch very substantial numbers of cruise missiles, air-to-ground attacks using stealth and other aircraft. You could also carry out cyber attacks and, again, go after the missile stocks and the other retaliatory means, some of the short-range systems that we know about and that we know where they are located. If you're going to do something substantial, you need to be ready for what comes out. And I know actually, that because it's publicly known that there's a drawdown of modest terms of non-essential people at Al Udeid Air Base at Qatar, presumably at the other air bases that are up and down the west side of the Gulf, and that there is very likely the return to those bases of the kind of air and ballistic missile defenses that we had deployed there prior to the 12-day war.
But if you were the CENTCOM commander right now, what assets would you want to have in addition to those already in place or on their way to credibly support the options the president has been considering?
Well, I don't know specifically what's on the ground. I'm obviously not the CENTCOM commander anymore, but when I was there, for example, we did develop the plan, part of which was executed on the final 24 hours of the 12-day operation when the U.S. entered it to destroy the nuclear program. And you don't just destroy the nuclear program. You have to take down the air and ballistic missile defenses. That's largely been done by Iran. You need to be aware to the possibility of others, and you'd have to take those out certainly to ensure safety of your operations. But you also go after, again, the retaliatory means. That plan is in existence. There's a lot of branches and sequels they can embark on. And again, this would include defensive systems and ensuring that they are on the ground ready to protect against missiles, perhaps rockets that can make it across the Gulf, and other retaliatory strikes. Also to be alert to what the remaining proxies in the region can do. That includes the Houthis, needless to say, who have at times launched weapons into the GCC state boundaries. So all of this, and again, I'm quite confident that whatever else is needed in terms of air capacity, air capability, particularly if it comes to stealth bombers and so forth, will be available as required as well. Keep in mind that some of this capability, as is publicly known because it was briefed after the U.S. operation at the end of the 12-day war, you can literally fly from the United States and refuel it in flight the entire way out there, have them drop their bomb load, and come back to wherever it is you want to recover them.
I have several more questions, but
Sure.
for the sake of time, I open for the Q&A session. But sir, maybe we can keep answers short, so we can
we don't do short
take
answers.
as many questions as possible.
You need these are nuanced issues, and they require nuanced answers. Or else the ambassador is going to be asking me why I didn't raise something.
First, General, it's good to see you up there.
Likewise.
You look like you're ready to invade another country or run Mosul again. And thanks for the kind but over-the-top comments.
Nope, all deserved. Even though you went to Harvard instead of Princeton.
We are in a really new situation in the region after all of this,
yes.
That we didn't see but hoped for in the 20 years you and I were bashing around out there.
Exactly, yep.
How can we, imagine not that you're the CENTCOM commander again, but that you're the president, what would you do to lock in and make sustainable the current positive security environment we have in the region against all of our enemies and with all of our friends?
First, I think you would have to maintain a sufficient presence in the region. You know well that those in the region get worried very quickly when they hear that we are going to execute a pivot to Asia. That was a terrible word as a description of our new orientation of our national military forces. Far better would have been rebalanced to Asia, but therefore keeping a sufficient footprint in the Middle East. You've heard the old adage, I used it on a number of occasions, that trying to leave the Middle East for the United States is like Michael Corleone trying to leave the mafia. You just can't do it. You keep getting sucked back in, and so you should recognize, therefore, to maintain that. And that's a constant challenge because there's a finite number of resources, and if you have an aircraft carrier task force and all kinds of other capabilities at an unprecedented level in the U.S. Southern Command, that obviously means that you're having to take risk elsewhere. But I'd argue that, again, this is a time to actually lean into and solidify the gains. I'm particularly worried with the situation in Syria. I spoke positively about it, and indeed the leader of that, who I should note, Ahmed al-Shara, when he had a different name, was in detention in Iraq. Throughout the period of the surge, he was actually detained prior to the surge for being an al-Qaeda cell leader, caught planting explosives by the side of the road. I didn't know his name at that time. He was a relatively small-time leader, but he spent 5 years in detention, and I'm sure was released only when we transitioned to the Iraqis, when also, I think, Laith, Khazali, and Qais were released as well. He then formed the Nusra Front, the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, then thankfully broke away from that, went to Idlib, established a government in that province, which was really more political Islam rather than extremist Islam, and actually built quite a capable army, again, for a province, but it wasn't just a bunch of tribes, militias, and again, sufficient to take down the regime forces in Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and ultimately Damascus. But at the end of the day, and by the way, I interviewed him on stage in New York this past September during the UN General Assembly. It was the first real high visibility for him, frankly, to a U.S. audience. And it was a surreal experience because of his route to where he was, the positions I'd had over the years. And I must say, I found him to be very impressive. He has real charisma. He's quite thoughtful. He can turn a phrase. He has a wry sense of humor. Noted, we were in somewhat different positions relative to each other, 15 years ago or whatever it was at that time. And I said, well, now, Mr. President, I trust that you are trying to do what, frankly, we tried to do in Mosul when I was a two-star, which is, with all the ethnic, sectarian, tribal, and other fault lines that ran through our province, which run through the entire country of Syria, almost all of those of the Middle East. I'm sure that what you're trying to do is to establish a government that is representative of all the elements in your country and will provide not just majority rule, but minority rights. The challenge has been operationalizing that. It's been very, very difficult for him. I'm sure you know that right now, in fact, the regime forces, the new regime forces, the Syrian military, are actually fighting the Syrian Democratic Forces along that line, more up in their northern part rather than down in the south, and actually trying to keep the southern tribes, the Arabs are part of the Syrian Democratic Forces, from rising up right now. They want to control it, localize it. But that is very, very serious, and they clearly have not, despite all the negotiations, been able to persuade the Syrian Democratic Forces to give up their arms or become part of the Syrian military or some other finesse. That's just the Syrian Democratic Forces. You've got the Druze down in the south as well. There's other elements contiguous to Jordan. You have the Free Syrian Army, which is still largely not just contiguous with Turkey, but also aligned with them. And you have the Alawites out on the coast. They retreated out there when their leader was thrown out of power. So he controls from Aleppo down to Damascus and a little bit more, but he's got real challenges. The reason I go on at length is because this is a huge success, but it is a very fragile one, and we need to do everything we can to support that, to help him revive the economy, to develop the kind of governance that I've described, a variety of other initiatives. That's very important. Same with Lebanon, as I mentioned. It's really important to use this moment to further disarm Hezbollah, not just below the Litani, but further increasingly up north of the Litani and all the way eventually to the capital of Beirut, working to enable Iraq to the extent that is necessary, and they're certainly very much governing themselves far and away at this moment. And I think the drawdown that's gradually taking place is prudent, noting that there will be capabilities still very much in that in the region to keep the pressure on the Islamic State, having learned the hard way that if you take your eyes off an Islamist extremist organization, it can reconstitute, as was the experience after we departed from Iraq. And Prime Minister Maliki pursued highly sectarian actions that led the military to be focused on demonstrators there instead of continued focus on the Islamic State. So you walk your way around. I think there's a number of different actions that need to be taken. Frankly, I'm disappointed that there still is not a Senate-confirmed Assistant Secretary for Near East Affairs. You well know your old deputy had actually made it out of committee and then got pulled at the last minute. Again, I'll leave the arguments for that aside and just note that there needs to be a Senate-confirmed Assistant Secretary. In my view, he would have been a superb one didn't happen, so what do you do now? So again, lots and lots of actions. And then overall, just keeping the pressure on Iran. It will be interesting if this current situation if the temperature is taken down on the streets to where it would be reasonable for us to engage the regime on the nuclear program. How would you solidify those results? Ensure that they agree that they will never enrich at all. Agree to keep their missile program down. Agree to stop other dangerous actions trying to resurrect or reconstitute proxies in the region as well.
How can we?
Well, if again, how you do that, if they do not agree and we find any shred of their nuclear program left, we take it out. Again, keep in mind, they're basically defenseless right now. They're in the weakest position, again, the most fraught position, to use that wonderful British term, I would argue, since the Iran-Iraq war. It's very, very tenuous for them right now, despite the massive security force numbers that they can deploy in the streets, but that is not sustainable over time. So again, just keep the heat on them. If you're going to have to deal with the current regime, then have some very draconian considerations and objectives, and if they don't agree to them, then you take out the rest of the missile force. I think President Trump was very clear on this, and right. When Prime Minister Netanyahu observed that he would do that, Trump was asked, he said, yep, we'll take him down again.
Well, a long time ago, I had raised this possibility that if there is going to be a major uprising in Iran and towns and cities are liberated, there is a danger, there is a risk that the regime will return its missiles back on its own people, like what happened in Syria. So how can we entrust the regime with its promises when they have broken them in the past?
If they break the promise, then we destroy what it is that was the issue. So again, am I worried about the prospects of the regime turning weapons? They're already turning weapons on their own people. Frankly, rifles are a hell of a lot more accurate, or heavy machine guns or whatever, than missiles that are left in their arsenal. Some of which have a minimum range that makes them not all that useful for certainly putting down demonstrations. I mean, there's a lot of other risks. There could also be a situation in which this becomes a humanitarian catastrophe. Obviously, the economy is not functioning well right now. It wasn't functioning well before the demonstrations and before the shopkeepers started to close their doors and pull down the metal barrier. So they're in a very tough situation in that regard, and it could get much tougher for the people. There's also the possibility, needless to say, that some of the minorities, whether the Kurds or the Azeris or Arabs, there's some other Turkmen, any number of these could actually splinter off. So there's a lot of, look, we should have learned, I think, during the Arab Spring, if not already with our operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, that regime change does not always work out like you would hope it to, quickly or sometimes at all. In fact, the shining example of the post-Arab Spring period was, for a period of time, Tunisia, which now appears to be in the grip of an authoritarian leader once again.
Thank you, sir. Next question.
Thank you, General. My name is Shayan Sami. I am a national security analyst for Iran International.
Okay.
And first and foremost, thank you for your 37 years of service.
It's the greatest of privileges. Thank you.
And secondly, a wise general once said, life is a competitive endeavor.
It sure is.
Yeah.
That is rule number one. When I am asked for advice to young people, it is that reality. Life is a competitive endeavor. Embrace it, compete, and try to be the very best you can be while also being the best team player you can be as well.
And that could be translated as success requires effort and strategy. For the Iranian people who have been in the streets and screaming for freedom, what could be their message, or how could they formulate their message so the world community can, A, believe that they have a leader and they are asking for that leader to lead them? And secondly, as somebody who's been involved in national security efforts, what do you think a free and democratic Iran would be benefiting the U.S. national security?
Well, obviously, a free and democratic Iran would benefit not just U.S. national security, but the entire region's national security, because at the root of many of the problems in the region in recent decades have been this regime and Iran's capabilities. It is the one that enabled Hezbollah to build up the extraordinary capability that they had before the intense Israeli air campaign after the decimation of their leadership by these supply chain operations, not just decapitation. They'd already lost most of the top 20. This took down the next several thousand. They enabled Hamas to a very considerable extent. Yes, there was also money coming from other countries that was approved by Israel and allowed to go to Hamas under a mistaken notion that Hamas was becoming a more responsible neighbor. They, in many respects, enabled the Houthis. The Houthis are tough in and of their own right, but this certainly did very much give them additional capabilities, providing both the hardware and funding for other capabilities. I already mentioned what they did through the Iraqi Shia militia that supported Iran, because there's a very substantial others that do not, needless to say. But all that they did to our forces, to Iraqi forces, and also to the Iraqi people. And then their own actions, their unilateral activities, whether it's interfering with the freedom of navigation in a Gulf that still provides a very considerable amount of energy to the world's economy. Also, other destructive actions. They were actually caught in Kabul, for example, with an entire building full of explosives that they were going to provide to some of those that were carrying out their instructions. They also helped some of the insurgent forces that were contiguous to their area. So again, tons and tons of mischief in the region that would be reduced, eliminated, if indeed this was to become, again, a responsible stakeholder in the region, a democratically elected government, free market economy. Imagine this is a very sophisticated culture, civilization, population, well-educated. The potential is there with, again, you have the gas and oil, among others. And not only have they failed to capitalize on this, they've actually mismanaged that which they have. I mean, the latest example was the fact that they were considering moving 1 or 2 million people out of Tehran because they can't provide water for them. So this is just a colossal failure all around. And to have this failed state replaced with a revolutionary power that is not satisfied with the status quo, to have a status quo power focusing on itself that would partner with those in the region rather than threatening them would be transformative. This is already a region that is very much heading in the right direction. If you look at the GCC countries, even differences among them that have emerged in the past year or so, especially in Yemen, some other challenges that there have existed between them over the years. Despite that, this is an extraordinary location. I should note that in addition to being a partner at KKR, one of the largest investment firms in the world, and the chairman of the KKR Global Institute, which does geopolitical risk, macroeconomic, public policy risks during the diligence process, but I'm also the chairman of KKR Middle East. And the reason for that is simple. That's just within the last year, because we now want to invest in these countries, not just invest their money for them. That is a very, very significant development. You could put that on steroids. You could accelerate all of the development and progress that's ongoing if you could get Iran out of the category of destructive forces and revolutionary powers and put them into a category of, again, democratic, free market, and status quo powers.
General, how can the people amplify their demands to the world community so they can understand they do have somebody that they want, they are calling that person's name? So how could they
Well, one of the ways is to help them, as I said earlier, not only to communicate more effectively with themselves, but more effectively with the outside world. As you know, Iran right now, the regime forces are searching for Starlink dishes, searching for any way that people are able to get out and so forth. Again, getting more of those in, making sure it stays turned on, trying to prevent it from being jammed, providing other capabilities that do exist, that are, some of which are publicly known, would help. The biggest issue, though, I think, is that there needs to be the emergence of leadership. This is still largely a leaderless. There are local leaders without question and so forth, but and leaders that then could put forward their big ideas. Keep in mind, there's a intellectual construct for strategic leadership. I actually developed it for myself between my 3- and 4-star tours in Iraq, knowing that I was going to go back to command what became known as the Surge. And it consists of 4 tasks, the most important of which, far and away, the paramount task is to get the big ideas right, what your strategy is after understanding all of the elements of a particular situation in very considerable detail, something we did not do, I must admit, before going into Iraq. So get the big ideas right, communicate them effectively to, in this case, your movement, but also to all others with a stake in the outcome, the world, oversee the implementation of the big ideas, provide energy example, incentives, initiative, hiring, attracting the best and brightest, letting those not move, measuring up to move on to something else, the organizational architecture, which will be evolving constantly, the metrics to determine whether you're winning or losing, and then how the leader spends his or her time, which is crucial. And as part of that leader's battle rhythm or schedule of recurring events and activities have to be those that enable you to perform the 4th task, which is to determine how you refine the big ideas as the situation evolves to do it all again and again and again. That's what needs to happen. There need to be strategic leaders and leaders at all other levels. That's going to put them in harm's way, needless to say. It's going to be very, very hazardous to be a leader with this kind of ubiquitous surveillance and presence in, again, every village, town, municipality. But that is one of the elements that is missing right now. Could the Shah's son provide that? I don't know. I mean, only the people can assess whether or not he would truly inspire them, have the right big ideas. What he has said has seemed to be reasonable, the way he's described possible transitions, whether it's a renewed, in a sense, monarchy or a democratically elected government, and he's acknowledged both of those possibilities, how they would get to that. But of course, it's a long way between where you are in Iran right now, which is essentially still pretty chaotic, even if the numbers of demonstrations and demonstrators have been diminished by the very aggressive actions of the regime forces.
Exactly for that reason, even if there is a leader either in Iran or outside Iran, there should be or there might be a need for a certain amount of kinetic help or assistance.
Could be. And again, those would be among the options that would be examined. I don't want to suggest, because I deliberately have not talked to my old comrades at the CIA. It's actually helpful not to know something that's classified in a situation like this, so I can speculate without appearing to be giving away something that was shared. But I'm sure that there is communication with potential leaders. I'm sure diplomats are in touch with the Shah's son, among others. I'm sure that there is a determination of how the movement could be helped if there is a decision to take kinetic action in particular. But also, as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of other, and ideally what you do, as the ambassador knows far better than others in here, you need a comprehensive, if you will, civil military approach to this. So not just military, not just kinetic activity, but again, diplomatic, economic, informational, cyber, and other categories of assistance and initiatives that are pursued.
Thank you very much. I was going to
We can
allow
do
a question from the back,
Oh.
if you have still time. Okay. Ma'am?
Hi, General. Thank you for being here. My name is Ferial from Georgetown Security Studies. If there is a chance of giving an off-ramp to the members of IRGC, how do you think that would happen? Since they are very much isolated and they have lost all their proxies in the region, if there is a chance for them to take a leave, what would that strategy be?
Well, that's particularly tricky. But I should note that during the surge in Iraq, which was a comprehensive civil military counterinsurgency campaign, not only did we pursue the irreconcilable elements relentlessly, even more relentlessly than we had before, not only did we pursue a clear hold, build transition instead of clear and leave, where the enemy can reconstitute, we also pursued reconciliation. But that requires a pretty substantial organizational capacity to determine who is reconcilable and to whom should you offer reconciliation. In other words, look, you want to work with us or continue to work actively or tacitly against us. By the way, if you keep doing that, you may well be on the X, as they say, for our special or conventional forces, and it's not a good thing to be on the X of the U.S. military, as President Maduro and his wife learned quite recently in Venezuela. But we're a long way from there. We just, that requires, again, a very substantial capacity. We had a special intelligence group that was set up to do nothing more than determine who should we offer reconciliation, and more importantly, who was irreconcilable and therefore needed to be detained, which we preferred to do, by the way, because you can interrogate them legally and get information that's very useful, or killed if they resisted detention. But again, that implies a capability that really is not here, but at least conceptually and in general terms, there could be offers made that, if you stop killing people and perhaps give us information about comrades who have not stopped killing, that perhaps you could offer them some kind of reconciliation, asylum, you name it. But keep in mind that this requires a very substantial organization, and as we have discussed here, not only is there not a substantial organization, there's not even a leader who has emerged, at least on the ground inside the country. And of course, one of the challenges that the Shah's son has is he's not in the country. And leadership in these kinds of situations generally is helped if you have considerable street credibility. And that, in this case, does not exist.
I don't think Iran would be a permissive environment for opposition leaders. But with that note,
it's not at all. That's why you get all the more credibility for providing it, assuming that you survive to tell about it.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you very much, sir.
No, it's been a privilege. And again, thanks for the great work that you are doing and have done over a number of years.
Thank you very much for the insight.
For it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the insightful discussion.
Thank you. And thank you all.